And so I wanted to tell you a few of the stories from my first year teaching and how it followed this path to what I think was a pretty successful year. Um, so at the beginning of the year, back May last year, I had the task of finding a job. And it was really, really awesome. I didn't really have any idea where I wanted to teach, so I spent the month of May just flying around the country and going to a bunch of different schools in New York City, Baltimore, Detroit, all over. And so I had found this really awesome school in Baltimore, and they really wanted an answer from me, but I already had my flight booked to Oakland, and I was like, I just might as well just use this as a vacation, go check out Oakland and see what's there. And as soon as I walked into that school, I knew that I had to say sorry to Baltimore because it's such a special place. My school's in East Oakland, which is a primarily Latino area of Oakland. And it's actually a dual language school. So what that means is that kids learn how to speak English and Spanish together. So native English speakers learn how to speak Spanish and vice versa. But that's just beginning. So it's in kindergarten right now. And those kindergartners will work their way up. So I've got 4 years to learn Spanish enough that I can teach half in Spanish and half in English, which, it's one thing to speak Spanish, but to be able to teach in it is another story. So check back with me about that one. So I really wanted to make sure that the school I chose was really collaborative with its teachers, and it is. We meet 3 times a week for an hour, the 4th grade teachers, and plan together. It's amazing. I wanted a school with a strong community. It's a really strong community, not just within the school, but outside. The community 7 years ago rose up and said, we don't like the way that this school is preparing our kids for the future. And so they completely changed the way that the school operated. And that all came from the community. And they were able to advocate for themselves and for their kids, which is really special. So all of those things together made me know that this was a great fit for me. But first I had to get there, and so moving there was quite interesting, and getting across the country was something that I've done big moves before, but never by myself. So that was also a really big challenge for me. But once I got there, it was really special because the first thing that my principal had us do when we got together as a staff was to create a vision for the year. By the end of this year, what do you want your kids to be able to do, and what do you want to be able to do as a professional? And so I created this vision, never having taught by myself before, never having had a class of kids before. I said, by the end of this year, I want my students to be able to look at the world around them, to articulate the problems that they see in their community, and then come up with an action plan to fix those problems and do it. And my principal goes, you're a first year you want to do that in your first year of teaching? But she didn't doubt me. It was not a doubtful look. It was just like okay, we'll see how this goes. Like, not sure about that one. So I said, that's my vision for this year. And I had it posted in the classroom for the kids to see. The first day of school, these kids come in, these amazing kids. I'm greeting them at the door and I say to them, handshake, high five, or hug. Every single one of those kids said hug. Never even met them before. I'm a new teacher in their community. They've never seen me before. I've got a weird accent. I'm 10 feet tall. And they all want to give me a hug. And I said, you know what? This is going to be an amazing year. This is going to be a special year. These kids already want to hug me without even knowing me. That's a good sign, right? And so I think that was part of the really special first day that we had together. Of course, after teaching them the Michigan fight song, they felt some connection with Michigan, and and I had already started the indoctrination process. So they might be coming to Michigan in the future, definitely. But I think part of the really great thing that we did this year was I did the same thing that my principal did with me, I did with my kids that first week of school. I asked them, who do you want to be at the end of this year? And I think it was the first time they'd ever been asked that question. Usually people ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? but they're never asked, what are you going to do this year to reach that goal? And so being able to think about, okay, well, it's a bigger goal than what do I need to do by the end of today to be successful. But they were thinking about, what do I need to do by June to be successful this year? Because I wasn't going to tell them what success looked like. I'm not going to say, oh, you need to get this score on this test, or you need to do, 5 nice things to people by the end of the year. I wanted them to come up with the terms for their success so that they could feel ownership in that goal. Because I had enough goals for them, but they needed a goal for themselves. And so I had some really, really amazing goals. And they all wanted that goal so much throughout the year that was the motivation itself. And it was intrinsic motivation. They wanted to get it for themselves. And so some students had goals like, I want to be on grade level for reading, which is, it's a great goal to have. Other kids said, I want to have a reputation in this class that I am there for everyone. Like a big variety of goals that they were able to come up with. And then I had these goals in a special binder. And then whenever I would see kids struggling or veering off that path, I would call them over to this binder and remind them what they wrote at the beginning of the year. Now, I didn't say if you meet your goal by the end of the year, you get an ice cream party or anything like that. They wanted to reach this goal for themselves, which I think was such an amazing thing to see them work for that for no other reason than to make themselves proud. But of course, there were a lot of bumps in the road this year. Bumps that I could have never expected and bumps that they could never expected. The first of which was the election. It was such a different experience, this election in California, than it was here, because everyone was super vocal. For the next few months, everyone would always start the conversation with, what's this jokester done now? But in my area, that's California in general, but in my area in particular, there was a lot of fear. A lot of fear. Legal immigrants had fear. Let alone my students who don't have documents. And so I had a lot of kids come up to me saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to come to school anymore. It's too dangerous. Too dangerous to leave the safety of our home. I remember the morning after the election, I was so energized to make sure that my students knew that this was a safe space. In fact, this was the safest space for them to be every day. Because if they didn't believe that, then why come? Before learning comes safety and family, right? And so if you don't feel safe and you don't feel that your family is safe, you're not going to think that school is the priority. And so greeting my kids that morning after the election was a sign written in English and Spanish outside the door that said, this is a safe space. No matter what happens outside, in this room I am safe, respected, and valued. I am listened to, cared about, and believed in. And so that was my way. Before I even said good morning to my kids, I wanted them to see that I knew what happened last night. I was not going to ignore it, but this was the safest place for them to be. A few months later, I saw on Facebook Ann Arbor Public Schools had a chant that they did in an assembly. 400 kids did this chant, and I was listening to it, and I was like, wait a second, that's this chant. So they had seen that message on Facebook, and they took it, and they used it in an assembly, and the same idea. They wanted kids to know that they were safe, and that they supported the kids who were feeling fear. So even though the election and the events following the election was definitely a bump in the road for these kids and in meeting their goals, it really was a crucial moment for me as their teacher, because that was going to define the rest of the year. And what I saw was kids really understanding Donald Trump. The morning after the election, there was a big protest. And I would call it a protest, but it was really just kids coming into school and yelling, F Donald Trump. And I said, okay, we're not going to handle it that way, right? We're in a school, we're not going to handle it that way. And that was the attitude that I had in my class. Just really so angry, and they didn't know what to do with that anger. And so I said, all right, let's find a way to do something with this anger. What should we do? And kids had all these ideas, some of which I would never allow to do to Donald Trump. But what we decided to do was write him a letter. And even though we didn't get a response, the fact that these kids were thinking of him reading their letter, whether he did or not, and what they wrote in their letter, I understand that you're president now. I wish you the best of luck. And I want to make sure that this country is a safe place for everyone. Just a really respectful tone, and I was so impressed by them at that time. And I knew that this was going to be a great learning opportunity for these kids. And you know, I'm so fortunate that I work in a sanctuary district. So that means that school officials won't give away any information about kids to anyone. We did have ICE officials come to the school and try and get information from us about our students, but we had the training to know that we have no requirement to do that. So, and I think once kids saw that and saw that commitment to them, they knew that school was a safe place to come. And so that's really an important part of what happened. Another bump in the road, well, not really a bump in the road, but an interesting experience for me and my personal goal, and that goal I told you I made with my principal. I was working a second job at a catering company. I live in the most expensive area in the world and don't get paid to show for it. So I was working at a catering company, and the particular job that I had that night was serving at an elementary school auction just outside of Silicon Valley, basically where all the really wealthy people from Silicon Valley live, so not right in it. But it was basically an auction for an elementary school in this really wealthy district, and they were raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for a new playground. And I was talking with, it was my first gig with this catering company, I was talking with the other people. Turns out not all of them, but a lot of the people that I was working with were teachers from Oakland. And so we're here in this server uniform with platters of hors d'oeuvres, passing around these platters of hors d'oeuvres to all these parents and administrators. And we're all just looking at each other and saying, why don't we have something like this? You know, and it was a moment of self-pity for all of us. They did this thing where there wasn't even anything being auctioned off. They just had everyone stand up and then said, we're going to go up by $1,000. Whenever you stand, that's how much you're giving. And we'll go up by increments of 1,000. So everyone stood up, they wrote down all the paddle numbers, and then they said 2,000. Some people sat down. This was just donating. There's nothing attached to this. So they would write down all the paddle numbers. Eventually, we were up to $47,000, and two guys would not sit down. So they just kept going up and up and up, and we're just sitting here with our mouths open. Like, I can't even get pencils for my classroom, and these kids are getting this hundreds of thousands of dollars for a playground, which is really amazing, and I really applaud them for it. But it was a moment where I had to say, okay, what am I doing, and what am I doing it for? And it was a moment of realization that my goal, I didn't need that much money for a playground to meet my goal as a teacher. And I thought about my kids' goals, and I thought, they don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars for a playground to meet their goals either. And so that was a moment where I realized, you know what? It's not good to be self-pitying about what other people have and what other schools have half an hour away. It's more important that we keep focused on this goal and allow ourselves to have what it takes to meet that goal. Shortly afterwards, Oakland Unified School District ran out of money completely. In January, they went on a budget freeze, but still gave principals access to the money for emergency needs. Well, principals fighting for their schools stocked up on that money and put it in their own accounts. So basically, they ran out of money, but gave principals the access to take it for what they needed, so they didn't end up saving any money. So all of a sudden, end of April, they've got to find $10 million before the end of the school year, otherwise the state would take them over. So that's the point where nothing was allowed. Nothing. No pencils, no paper, no payment for staff meetings, absolutely nothing. There was no money for anything. And so, and that was another test for us to say, can we really do all this with nothing? And luckily, I had so much support last year from all of you, and in meeting a wish list that I had on Amazon. And so I was able to keep those supplies going for my kids, but other teachers ended up spending another few $100s just to get pencils and paper for their kids. So I was really lucky to have that support from you, and it was really needed this year, so I really appreciate that. But I was also able to find support from people in the school, and we were all trying to do the same thing, meet our goals, help our kids meet their goals with no resources. And so we came up with really creative ways to do things. We used the whiteboard a lot more with the markers on the whiteboard, and we used journals a lot instead of making copies, worksheets. And so we were able to make do a lot better. And our kids, all of this was happening, and our kids just kept trucking along to meet their goals. And it was really amazing to see. But there were definitely some kids who had challenges. One of my kids, 3 years ago, saw his dad get shot. And his mom works 2 jobs, one from 11 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., and then the other one from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. And so he goes home and has no one at home to see him, and he stays up super late so his mom gets home, and then wants to spend as much time with her as possible, so doesn't go to bed until 3 in the morning, and then is way too tired to come to school the next day. Just not going to happen. His mom calls me and says, Nicholas won't get up for school in the morning. And I say, he's got to come to school. It's so important. It's so important. And she's like, there's nothing. He's just not moving. And so it became my job to get him out of bed in the morning. And I say, put me on. I said, Nicholas, you are coming to school this morning. You've got to meet your goal. There's no way that you can meet your goal if you don't come to school today. And even with that, he missed 40 days of school this year. And part of me feels so sad about that. But part of me held him to that expectation that he was at school every day. And so it was a really interesting balance this year of holding high expectations for all students, but actually knowing where they're coming from. At the beginning of the school year, I did 20 home visits with kids to see where they were living, meet their families, know what their life is like outside of school. And that was so helpful for me because I knew the background. I knew what they were coming from every day, what they were going home to every day, and was able to use that in my teaching. So here was the final test of whether I met my personal goal this year. We were reading a book called Writing Freedom, and it's about a girl during the gold rush who grows up in a boys' orphanage and loves horses. And so she takes care of horses, but one day the head of the orphanage says to her, your job is to be in the kitchen. You can't take care of these horses. These are for the boys. Your job is to be in the kitchen because when you grow up, you need to be the cook for the orphanage. And she was not accepting that. So she ran away, dressed up as a boy, and became the best stagecoach driver. This was before cars, stagecoach driver in the whole West. And so she was legendary for being the best stagecoach driver, and she did it as a girl. And my kids were so upset by that. My kids were not by the fact she was so great, but by the fact that she was denied the opportunity to work with horses at the orphanage. And so we had this discussion about sexism. And after they got over the word sexism, they were finally able to see that sexism is not a problem that's gone away. They were able to see, hey, this is actually a problem that's happening in our school. And so we had a discussion about that, and they told me, boys only play soccer at recess. When a girl tries to play soccer, the boys go, oh, we don't want you to get hurt. We care about you so much that we don't want you to get hurt. So you go play the bouncy ball on the wall, and we'll play soccer because we're stronger. And my kids saw that immediately. My girls, saw immediately that's sexism. That's it. And a few other of my kids had stories about their moms not getting paid as much as the men at their places of work. And that's sexism. That's sexism. And a few others had stories about their sisters not being given the same rigor of work in the classroom as their brothers. Well, that's sexism too. And my kids were able to see these things. They just didn't have a word for it. And they didn't know the word would be so inappropriate. But they didn't have a word. Once they had that word for it, my English language learners had a way to communicate what a problem that they're seeing in the world. They were finally able to say, that thing that happened at recess with the soccer, that's called sexism, and I know that it's not right. So what did we do about it? One of my kids raised their hand, and she said to me, we need to do something about this. And a light goes on in my head. I'm like, oh, that's my goal, right? Like, they actually have to do something. We can't just talk about it. And so another one of my girls raised her hand and says, I want to make posters to put around the school that show the lives of influential women and how the contributions they've made to society and our community. I said, fine, do it. Another student raises her hand and says, I want to make a video where I show the boys that the thing they do at recess with soccer is not okay. So I'm going to make a movie where I show boys saying, we don't want you to get hurt, and then I want to show them a good way to include us in soccer. I said, okay, go for it. I'll give you time in class. Another one of my kids said, I want to do a skit that I can perform for other people that shows them that I don't want to be a part of sexism anymore, and I'm not going to stand for it. And so I was like, fine. I typed up a little planning sheet that had what they were going to work on each day, and I said each group has to have a boy and a girl in it, so that there was no groups of just boys and no groups of just girls. And then I said, okay, in 2 weeks from today, I'm inviting everyone in the school to come into our classroom and see what you've done. And that's it. That's the only thing I did. I gave them a deadline. And my kids, who started as these kids who needed help forming sentences at the beginning of the year, were creating movies and posters and plays and actually making a difference in their community. So the night rolled around and I had 50 parents, administrators, teachers in my room here for the presentation. I bought some sparkling cider to make it really special, and I let them redesign the whole classroom to make it perfect for their presentations. And they rocked it. They rocked it. And the proudest moment of the whole year, I did nothing for. You know, like, how cool is that? I didn't have to do anything. And so it was really amazing for me to be able to see these kids, they can do it. You got to give them the tools. But as soon as they learn how to communicate the problems that they're seeing in the world, they'll do something to fix it. And so that was so important for me. Not only did I meet my goal, but they were able to then go on and communicate about other problems they were seeing in the world. We did it after the election, and we did it through the book that we read in the classroom. And both of those were so powerful. So in my mind, they were so successful this year. They met my goal for them. And they blew it out of the water. And so that was such a proud moment for me. But in terms of students' own goals, some of them didn't meet them. Not all of them were on grade level by the end of the year for reading. Not all of them had a great reputation for being kind in class. They tried. But they had to see that the goal doesn't just end at the end of the year, and if you don't meet it, then you're a loser, and if you do meet it, you're a winner. It's more complicated than that. And so at the end of the year, I said to the kids, we had individual conferences about their goals, where we talked about whether they met their goals and what they need to do. And I said to them, it doesn't end now. If you met your goal now, you're going to have an even higher goal tomorrow. And if you didn't meet your goal now, then you're going to keep working to meet that goal until you do. And when you do, you come back to me and I give you another one. Because the kids need to see that my time with them is not just September to June. My time with them is a lot longer than that, through college. And so I've gotten calls already this summer from kids saying to me, I met my goal. I didn't do it by June. I didn't do it by the first week of June, but I did it by the third week of June. And for me, that is so special that not only are they still working on their goals, but they feel the need to celebrate with me when they do. And that's so special to me. And it's part of why I just am so thrilled about teaching, is because when you give kids high expectations and you give kids freedom to explore and to make a difference, they do. Even the ones who have so much reason to be scared right now. Even the kids who are so disadvantaged in many ways, they're able to do it if you have goals for them and you believe in them. But teachers need that kind of support too. Teachers need the support to be able to make goals for themselves and follow through with it. And I think that's so important. And not only should they make the goals, but they should be given time to follow through with it. And it's such a shame in education. We find one thing that we think that works, and the government says we need to do that thing, and then 6 months later, that thing has the research has shown it doesn't work, so we're switching. Well, we need some time to make it work. We'll make it work. We just need some time to do that. And so I think that it's really important for us to give teachers time to make the things that we want them to do work, and help them reach their goals. I just got accepted into a fellowship through a nonprofit in Oakland that gives teachers voice in policymaking. And they have a group of 15 teachers every year that go through the fellowship, and they make recommendations to the district that last year the district took up. Last year they focused on teacher retention. In Oakland, 72% of teachers are within their first 5 years of teaching, and more than half of those teachers leave within 3 years. A lot of that's due to Teach for America being a 2-year program, but a lot of it is just due to the fact you can't afford it. I can afford it in my 20s without a family, but whenever I want something more than what I've got now, I've got to leave. There's no way I could be a teacher in Oakland and support a family. And so it's a part of the recommendations they made with that teachers need more support in Oakland, but they also need to be able to have a living wage in Oakland. And so the district actually took up measures. Part of the collective bargaining process is going to be compensation for people who stay in the district longer, and also more support for new teachers as they begin their journey so that they feel like this is a sustainable place for them to teach in the future. So I'm excited about my work to develop that voice through the fellowship. And I'm even more excited for my second group of kids to come in and amaze me like the first group did. And I'm so excited to see the future of teaching for myself and in this country. And I hope that we can give our teachers time to make learning in their classroom happen, and make it happen in a really meaningful way for kids. Because we can get those test scores to be what they want, fine, but those kids aren't going to be learning. And so we need to be really thinking about how we show success and how we can measure it. Thank you so much for having me back. It's been so amazing.